What happens when a fairy tale marriage turns into a public nightmare? For Elara Thorne, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, shimmering with crystal and old money, was supposed to be a celebration of her husband's success. She stood by his side, a perfect picture of devotion, her couture gown flowing over the gentle curve of her 8-month pregnancy. He was the prince of New York real estate. She was his adoring wife, carrying their heir. But in one glittering champagne-fueled moment, her prince would reveal himself to be a monster, and the facade of their perfect life would not just crack, it would eclode before the city's elite. The air in their Park Avenue penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken resentment. Elara Thorne adjusted the midnight blue silk of her custom Serafina gown, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery that struggled to distract from the taut, heavy sphere of her belly. At 8.5 months pregnant, she felt less like a goddess of fertility and more like a ship navigating treacherous waters. Every movement was a negotiation, every breath a conscious effort. "Are you almost ready?" Julian's voice, smooth as polished granite, cut through the silence from the master suite's doorway. He stood there already, a vision of tailored perfection in his Tom Ford tuxedo. Julian Thorne didn't just wear clothes. He inhabited them, his confidence a magnetic field that bent the world to his will. "Almost," Elara murmured, turning to face him. She had chosen the dress weeks ago, hoping it would make her feel elegant, ethereal. Now, under his critical gaze, she felt large, cumbersome. His eyes swept over her, a swift, almost imperceptible inventory that managed to miss her hopeful expression entirely. "That color. It makes you look rather pale, don't you think?" The comment landed like a small, sharp stone in her chest. It wasn't overtly cruel, but it was Julian's specialty. The subtle erosion of her confidence, chipping away at her piece by piece until she felt like a ruin. "I thought it brought out my eyes," she offered weakly, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, where their son was currently practicing his kicks. He grunted, turning his attention to his platinum cufflinks. "The car is downstairs. Beatrice is already texting, wondering where we are. You know how she gets about punctuality at these things." Beatrice Thorne, Julian's mother, was a woman who believed tardiness was a moral failing on par with grand larceny. The event, the Thorne Foundation's annual Starlight Gala, was the crown jewel of her social calendar and Julian's biggest philanthropic display of the year. It was an evening dedicated to raising money for underprivileged children, a cause that felt deeply ironic, given how little attention Julian paid to his own impending fatherhood. "I just need to put on my shoes," Elara said, moving towards the velvet ottoman. The simple act of bending down was a monumental task. She gritted her teeth, her back screaming in protest, as she fumbled with the delicate straps of her Jimmy Choos. Julian watched her struggle for a moment, his expression unreadable before sighing with theatrical impatience. "For God's sake, Elara, we'll be late." He didn't move to help. He simply stood there, a handsome statue of irritation. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She swallowed them down, a familiar cocktail of humiliation and frustration. This was their life now. The loving glances had been replaced by critical stares, the tender touches by impatient sighs. The man who had once written her poetry and flown her to Paris for a weekend now looked at her as if she were a line item on his balance sheet that was underperforming. She blamed the pregnancy at first, the hormones, the changes to her body, the shift in their social life. But the coldness had started before that, a creeping frost that began when his real estate empire Thorn Global Properties had secured the landmark Hudson Yards redevelopment deal. His success had inflated his ego to terrifying proportions, leaving little room for anything or anyone else. Finally securing the shoes, she stood up, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Okay, I'm ready." He gave her another once-over, his lips a thin, displeased line. "Try to stand up straight tonight. The slouching doesn't help." He then turned and walked out, leaving the words hanging in the air like poison. As she followed his imposing figure through their cavernous apartment, her hand once again found her belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump against her palm. "It's just you and me, little one." She thought a wave of fierce, protective love washing over her. "It's always been just you and me." The ride down in the private elevator was silent. The air in the chauffeured Maybach was colder still. Julian was on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips as he texted. Elara looked out the window, watching the glittering lights of Manhattan blur past. Each light represented a life, a story, a world of its own. Her own world, once so bright and full of promise, felt like it was shrinking, dimming, collapsing in on itself, until the only thing left was the hollow echo of what used to be. She was Mrs. Julian Thorne, a name that unlocked any door in the city. But tonight it felt less like a title and more like the name of a very beautiful, very expensive The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a symphony of excess. 3-tiered crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of 1,000 guests. The air hummed with the murmur of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a live jazz quartet. This was Julian's kingdom, and as they entered, he transformed. The cold, dismissive husband from the penthouse melted away, replaced by Julian Thorne, the charismatic titan, the beloved philanthropist. He clasped shoulders, kissed cheeks, and laughed a deep, resonant laugh that made women blush and men feel impotent. Elara was the accessory on his arm, the silent, smiling testament to his perfect life. Julian darling. Beatrice Thorne descended upon them, a formidable figure in emerald green taffeta and a fortress of diamonds. Her smile was as bright and hard as her jewelry. "You're late, fashionably, mother," Julian said, kissing the air beside her cheek. Beatrice's eyes the same piercing blue as her son's raked over Elara. "Elara, dear, that dress is a bold choice. The navy is so draining when one is already feeling tired." "I feel wonderful, Beatrice, thank you," Elara replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Beatrice's attention had already shifted back to her son. "All the important donors are by the silent auction. Councilman Miller is here, and I think I saw Robert Harrison from the board of MoMA. You must go and charm them." She shooed him away as if dismissing a servant. Julian gave Elara's arm a perfunctory squeeze. "Mingle," he commanded under his breath. "And for heaven's sake, try to look happy. People are watching." He was gone in an instant, absorbed into a throng of influential figures, leaving Elara standing alone at the edge of the glittering crowd. She felt like a buoy cut loose from its mooring adrift in an ocean of strangers who looked through her as if she were glass. She found a quiet spot near a marble column, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. From her vantage point, she could watch the room. She could watch Julian. He was magnificent, she had to admit. He moved with an innate predatory grace, his charisma a tangible force. And then she saw her. Serena Vance. Serena was the lead counsel for a rival development firm, a woman known for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. She was everything Alara was not sharp-edged, impossibly chic, in a silver form-fitting gown, her blonde hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. She and Julian were professional adversaries, yet they were laughing together, their heads bent close. There was an intimacy in their posture, a shared energy that made Alara's stomach clench. It wasn't the first time she had seen them like this. At other events, she'd noticed their prolonged conversations, the way his eyes would follow Serena across a room. She'd told herself it was just business, professional respect. But the secretive smile on Julian's face as he texted in the car flashed in her mind. It was the same smile he was giving Serena Vance right now. If looks could kill, that woman would be a pile of ash, a familiar voice said beside her. Alara started turning to see her best friend, Chloe. Chloe was an art gallery owner with a no-nonsense attitude and an allergy to phoniness, which made her presence at an event like this a true act of solidarity. "I don't know what you're talking about." Alara lied, her gaze still fixed on Julian and Serena. "Don't you?" Chloe followed her line of sight. "Ah, the Ice Queen and the Idiot King, a match made in corporate hell." Chloe took a sip of her champagne. "Listen, Alara, we need to talk." "Not here, Chloe." "Yes, here." Chloe insisted, her voice low and urgent. "I had a drink with a friend from law school last week. He works at Serena's firm. He said the whispers are getting louder, that Thorne and Vance aren't just professional rivals anymore." Alara's heart began to beat, a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. Whispers. What whispers? That their rivalry is just a cover, that they're working on something together, a backdoor deal, and that their partnership isn't strictly business. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Alara's feet. She gripped the marble column for support. She had suspected. She had felt it in her bones for months. The late nights at the office, the unexplained business trips, the growing emotional chasm between them. But hearing it spoken aloud, given voice by someone else, made it terrifyingly real. "He wouldn't," she whispered, trying to convince herself. "Not now. Not with the baby coming." Chloe's expression softened with pity. "Oh, honey, men like Julian don't see a baby as a reason to be faithful. They see it as a cage they need to escape from. And Serena Vance is the shiniest escape hatch in Manhattan." Just then a sharp, unfamiliar pain shot through Alara's lower back. She gasped, her hand flying to the spot. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked, her face etched with concern. "You're as white as a sheet." "I'm fine," Alara breathed, forcing the pain down. "It's just Braxton Hicks. The doctor said to expect them." But it felt different, sharper, more insistent. The baby shifted violently inside her as if he too could sense the poison in the air. She looked back across the room. Julian had placed a hand on the small of Serena Vance's back, guiding her towards the terrace. It was a gesture of ownership, a gesture that had once belonged to her. The whispers in her own mind were now louder than the buzz of the gala. The puzzle pieces she had refused to look at for so long were snapping into place, forming a picture of betrayal so vast and cruel it stole her breath. And as another, more intense cramp seized her, she had a terrible sinking feeling that the evening was about to get much, much worse. The next hour was a blur of polite smiles and empty conversations. Alara moved through the ballroom on autopilot, the twin pains in her back and her heart radiating through her body. She spoke to acquaintances who asked about the nursery, fended off unsolicited advice from older women, and dodged Beatrice's disapproving glares. All the while she was acutely aware of Julian, who had returned from the terrace without Serena, his mood inexplicably buoyant. The main event of the evening was Julian's speech. He was to accept an award for Philanthropist of the Year, a title his PR team had worked tirelessly to secure. As he ascended the stage, the room fell into a reverent silence. A spotlight found him, turning him into a golden, godlike figure. He began by thanking the foundation, the board, and the generous donors. He spoke of legacy, of building a better future, of the responsibility of the fortunate to help the less fortunate. His voice was a rich, captivating baritone, weaving a spell of sincerity over the audience. Elara had heard versions of this speech 100 times, and it always managed to sound convincing. Tonight it sounded like a cacophony of lies. "But a man is nothing without his foundation," Julian said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "He is nothing without the bedrock that supports him, that allows him to build his legacy towards the sky." Elara felt a flicker of hope. Was he talking about her? About their family? Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe Chloe was mistaken. His eyes finally landed on her, and for a moment they held her gaze. But there was no warmth in them, only a cold, calculating glint. A slow, cruel smile spread across his handsome face. "And as many of you know," he continued, his voice dripping with false sentiment, "my own foundation is expanding." A wave of warm, appreciative laughter rippled through the room. People turned to smile at Elara. She felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and a desperate, foolish hope. "My lovely wife Elara is here tonight," he said, gesturing towards her. The spotlight swung from him and settled on her, blinding her. She was pinned a butterfly on a board. "She has been my greatest project, taking her from a simple small-town girl and giving her the world." The tone had shifted. The warmth in the room cooled. The laughter died, replaced by an uncomfortable, uncertain silence. Elara's smile froze on her face. This wasn't a tribute. It was a prelude to an execution. "And now," Julian said, his voice taking on a tone of mock lament, "she is embarking on her own great project, motherhood. She has truly embraced the domestic arts. She has let herself go in the most beautiful way, of course. Swelling with purpose, you might say." A few sycophantic guests chuckled nervously, but most of the room was dead silent, watching the public vivisection with a kind of horrified fascination. He was painting her as a simple brood mare, a bumpkin he had elevated, and who was now fulfilling her rustic biological destiny. He was diminishing her, erasing her identity as an accomplished architect, as his partner in front of everyone they knew. He wasn't done. He leaned closer to the microphone, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "Some people build empires of steel and glass," he said, pausing for effect. "Others are content to build nurseries. And I, for one, think that is a beautiful, if somewhat limited, ambition. Let's hear it for Elara, everyone. For her, commitment." The applause was sparse, hesitant, and died out almost as soon as it began. The spotlight released her, swinging back to Julian as he basked in the aftermath of his cruelty. But Elara barely noticed. She was no longer in the ballroom. She was in a vacuum. The air sucked from her lungs, the world a distant roaring sound in her ears. Every insecurity he had ever cultivated in her, every casual insult, every dismissive gesture had just been weaponized and fired at her in a public forum. He hadn't just insulted her, he had tried to annihilate her. He had redefined her to this entire room as a simple-minded, unambitious vessel for his heir, a project he had completed and was now setting aside. The hot tears she had been fighting all night finally broke free, tracing silent, searing falls down her cheeks. Her whole body trembled, a seismic shudder of grief and rage. And deep within her another more powerful tremor answered. A violent, clenching agony ripped through her abdomen, stealing her breath and making her see stars. This was not Braxton Hicks. This was the raw, primal cry of a body pushed beyond its limits. Her fairy tale had ended. The monster was real. And her baby, her innocent son, had decided he had had enough of living in this gilded cage. He was coming. Now. The world swam back into focus with agonizing slowness. Julian was off the stage accepting congratulations from people who studiously avoided making eye contact with Alara. The jazz quartet started playing again, a frantic attempt to paper over the gaping hole of awkwardness Julian had torn in the evening's fabric. Alara didn't care. The only thing she could focus on was the fire in her belly. Rage, pure and incandescent, burned away her tears, leaving a terrifying clarity in its wake. She had to get to him. She had to confront him. Pushing her chair back, she stood up on shaky legs. Chloe was instantly at her side. "Alara, let's go. I'll get you out of here." "No," Alara said, her voice a low, dangerous growl she didn't recognize as her own. "Not yet." She began to walk, each step a testament to her willpower. The crowd parted before her as if she were a ghost, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She kept her eyes locked on Julian, who was laughing with a group of investors, holding his Philanthropist of the Year award like a scepter. He saw her approaching, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He excused himself, turning to meet her in a small alcove, hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. The music and chatter of the gala provided a thin veil of privacy. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice stripped of all its public charm. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You just stood on a stage and described your pregnant wife as a quaint little project you're tired of. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know." He had the audacity to look bored. "Oh, for God's sake, Alara, it was a joke. A little roast. You're being overly sensitive. It must be the hormones." "The hormones?" Her laugh was a brittle, broken sound. "You stood there talking about building a legacy while you're systematically destroying the only family you have. Is that part of the joke too?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between them, "is not my legacy. My legacy is the Thorn global skyline. It's the deals, the power, the name. This is just a chapter, a domestic requirement." The cruelty of his words was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical blow. A domestic requirement. Their marriage, their child, their entire life together reduced to a box he had to check. And Serena Vance, the name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Is she a domestic requirement too, or is she in the next chapter? Julian's face went rigid. The mask of indifference fell away, replaced by pure, cold rage. "You will not speak her name," he seethed, taking a step closer. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're hysterical." "I'm not hysterical," she said, her voice rising. "I am finally awake." And then it happened. Another contraction, fiercer and more powerful than any before, seized her body. It was a wave of pure agony that buckled her knees. She cried out a raw, involuntary sound of shock and pain. She grabbed his tuxedo jacket for support, her knuckles white. "What now?" he snapped, trying to pry her fingers off his lapel. More dramatics. But then he followed her horrified gaze downwards. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on the front of her midnight blue Serafina gown. A sudden warm gush ran down her legs, soaking her shoes and pooling on the polished marble floor. Her water had broken. The moment was so cinematic, so utterly dramatic, that for a second neither of them moved. It was the ultimate irrefutable biological truth. A visceral, messy reality crashing into Julian's perfectly curated evening. The baby was coming. The domestic requirement was demanding to be met. Elara stared at the puddle at her feet, then up at her husband's face. The anger was gone, replaced by something far worse. Panic and sheer, undisguised disgust. He looked at her at the evidence of her labor as if she were something unclean that had just ruined his party. The spell of his power over her was shattered. The last vestiges of love, of hope, of shared history evaporated in that single contemptuous glance. There was no us anymore. There was only her and the baby she would protect with her life, and him a stranger whose cruelty knew no bounds. The breaking point had been reached, and the waters that now pooled on the floor were washing away her old life forever. Chaos erupted in their small, semi-private corner of the gala. A woman who had been standing nearby gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God! Her water broke!" The words cut through the music and chatter like a siren. Heads turned. The murmuring grew louder, more frantic. Julian's perfectly controlled world was imploding in the most public and primal way imaginable. "Do something," Elara gritted out, leaning heavily against the wall as another contraction ripped through her. Julian was frozen, his face a mask of horror. His meticulously planned evening, his moment of triumph, was being literally washed away. He looked trapped, a cornered animal, desperate for an escape route. Chloe pushed through the gathering circle of onlookers, her face a mixture of fury and concern. "Someone call 911, she shouted, taking Elara's arm. "Elara, breathe. Just breathe." "Get her out of here," Julian hissed at Chloe, his voice low and venomous. "Take her through the service entrance. I don't want a scene." "A scene?" Chloe rounded on him, her eyes blazing. "You're worried about a scene. Your wife is in labor. Where the hell is your humanity?" People were closing in their phones, discreetly raised. This was a scandal far more interesting than any silent auction. Julian Thorne, the great philanthropist, the family man, looking at his wife in her moment of ultimate vulnerability, with nothing but cold fury. Panic finally spurred Julian into action, but it was a selfish, desperate panic, focused solely on damage control. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. I need to manage this." He wasn't calling an ambulance. He wasn't calling his mother. He was scrolling through his contacts, his mind clearly on his business, on the fallout. The pain was immense, but through it, Elara found a pocket of chilling calm. It was the calm of a soldier on a battlefield who knows there's no going back. She watched her husband, the father of the child, fighting its way into the world, and saw with absolute certainty what his priorities were. "Don't bother calling your office, Julian," she said. Her voice, though strained, cut through the noise. It was clear and sharp as a shard of ice. Julian froze his thumb, hovering over the screen of his phone. The immediate crowd fell silent, sensing a new act was about to begin in this terrible play. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a warning. "Don't you dare." She dared. Fueled by the agony of childbirth and the inferno of his betrayal, she looked him dead in the eye. "There's no point in trying to salvage your precious Hudson Yards deal tonight," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The Hudson Yards deal was the biggest, most contested real estate venture in the city, and Thorne Global Properties was in a bitter final stage battle for it. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath as the contraction began to subside. She then turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the horrified, fascinated faces in the crowd until it landed on one in particular: Serena Vance. Serena had been drawn in by the commotion and was standing near the edge of the circle, her face a perfect porcelain mask of neutrality. But Elara could see the flicker of panic in her cold grey eyes. "After all," Elara continued, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence, "why don't you just ask your partner for help?" She held Serena's gaze. "Serena Vance seems to be the one you're building this new future for anyway. I'm sure she can handle the crisis." The name landed like a bomb. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where 100 different realizations dawned at once. The whispers Chloe had heard, the late-night meetings, the hand on the back. It wasn't just an affair. It was a professional conspiracy. Julian Thorne and his biggest rival, Serena Vance, were in bed together, literally and figuratively. He wasn't competing with her for the Hudson Yards deal. He was colluding with her. The public rivalry was a sham, a brilliant, audacious lie to manipulate the market and sideline other competitors. Serena Vance's composure finally shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking stark and skeletal under the ballroom lights. Julian looked between his wife and his mistress, his face a grotesque tableau of rage and utter devastation. He had been exposed, his personal and professional lives detonated simultaneously by the woman he had just tried to erase. Another contraction hit Elara harder this time. She cried out, sinking towards the floor. But Chloe, and surprisingly, an older gentleman she vaguely recognized as Robert Harrison from the MoMA board, caught her. "Get this man away from her," Mr. Harrison commanded, glaring at Julian with utter contempt. The unveiling was complete. In the opulent ballroom, surrounded by the city's elite, the truth had been laid bare, not by a whisper, but by the raw, undeniable power of a woman scorned and a baby determined to be born into a world free of its father's lies. The wail of the ambulance siren was a welcome scream, drowning out the frantic, venomous whispers that had consumed the ballroom. The paramedics were efficient and professional, their presence a grounding force in the swirling vortex of drama. They loaded Elara onto a gurney, her blue dress stained and her face pale but resolute. Julian tried to get into the ambulance with her. "I'm her husband," he stated, as if the title still held any meaning. One of the paramedics, a stern-faced woman named Maria, blocked his path. Chloe stood right behind her. "Sir, she's under extreme stress. The doctor inside said only one person can ride with her to minimize agitation. She's asked for her friend." Maria's eyes were like steel. She had clearly assessed the situation in seconds. The look of impotent fury on Julian's face was something Elara would treasure. Defeated, he stepped back as the doors slammed shut, leaving him on the curb, bathed in the flashing red and white lights, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. Inside the ambulance, the ride to Lenox Hill Hospital was a surreal journey through pain and clarity. Between contractions that felt like her body was being torn in two, Chloe held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, her presence a lifeline. Elara focused on her breathing, on the life force inside her, on the future. A future without Julian. 7 hours later, just as the dirty grey light of dawn began to break over the Manhattan skyline, Leo Alexander Thorne was born. He was small, angry, and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's determined eyes. Holding him for the first time, Elara felt a love so overwhelming and pure that it eclipsed all the pain and betrayal. This was her legacy. This tiny, screaming, beautiful boy. Not a building of steel and glass, but a life of flesh and blood. Julian arrived at the hospital hours later. He didn't come to the maternity ward first. He came with his lawyer, a shark named Marcus Finch. They found Elara in her private room, Leo asleep in a bassinet beside her bed. Chloe stood guard, like a sentinel. "Elara," Julian began, his voice devoid of all emotion. "We need to discuss how we're going to handle this." "There is no we, Julian," she said, her voice tired but firm. "And there is nothing to handle other than our divorce." Marcus Finch stepped forward, holding a folder. "Mrs. Thorne, Julian, is prepared to be very generous, provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding his business dealings and personal associations. We can release a joint statement about an amicable separation." Elara started to laugh. It was a raw, weary sound, but it was genuine. An NDA. Amicable. "Julian, did you not see what happened last night? The entire social and financial stratosphere of New York City watched you get exposed. Your personal association with Serena Vance is probably on the cover of the Post by now. The ship of Amicable has sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean." Julian's face tightened. "Don't be a fool, Elara. Think of your son. You want him to have a comfortable life, don't you? You don't want a protracted, ugly legal battle." It was a threat, plain and simple. "Fight me, and I will ruin you." "What I want," she said, her eyes boring into his, "is for my son to have a mother he can be proud of. One who doesn't roll over and let a bully buy her silence. So you can take your generous offer and your NDA, and you can leave." She looked at her sleeping son. "His name, by the way, is Leo Alexander Reyes. Reyes was my mother's name. He will not carry the name of a man like you." The finality in her voice was absolute. Julian and his lawyer stood there for a moment, stunned into silence by her audacity. She was no longer the quiet, agreeable wife. The woman in this hospital bed was a stranger to them, forged in the fires of public humiliation and childbirth. "You will regret this," Julian snarled as they left. "I will fight you for everything. You will walk away with nothing." The door clicked shut, leaving Elara and Chloe in silence. "Are you sure about this?" Chloe asked softly. "He will make your life hell." Elara looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Leo's hand. Her foundation. "He already did," she said. "Now I'm building something new." The aftershocks came quickly. The next day, the Thorne Global Board announced an internal investigation into the Hudson Yards bid. Serena Vance was fired from her firm. The gossip columns were having a field day, painting a lurid picture of corporate espionage and sordid affairs. Julian's philanthropic award was quietly rescinded. A week after Leo was born, a process server delivered the first legal documents to Elara's hospital room. It was a petition for sole custody, citing her emotional instability and public outburst as evidence of her being an unfit mother. The battle had just begun. But for the first time in a very long time, Elara Thorne Reyes felt ready for a fight. 1 year later, Elara stood on a dusty construction site in Brooklyn, a hard hat perched on her head and a roll of blueprints tucked under her arm. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of sawdust and the distant hum of the city. Before her, the steel skeleton of a building rose against the sky, the future site of the Reyes Community Center, a pro bono project she had designed and was now overseeing. Life after Julian was not easy, but it was real. His threats had not been idle. He had unleashed the full force of his legal team, attempting to bury her in motions and depositions. He had frozen their joint assets, forcing her to rely on Chloe, and alone from her estranged but now reconciled family. He painted her in the press as a vengeful, unstable gold digger. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed the woman he was fighting was the same one he had married. He didn't account for the fact that by trying to destroy her, he had stripped away all her fear, leaving only resolve. With the help of a brilliant, tenacious female lawyer, Chloe had recommended Elara fought back. They used the testimony of dozens of gala attendees. They subpoenaed phone records between Julian and Serena. They brought in forensic accountants who uncovered the shell corporations Julian and Serena had created to funnel money and information for their collusive Hudson Yards bid. The custody battle was brutal, but Julian's own arrogance became his undoing. On the stand, his contempt for Elara, his dismissive attitude towards fatherhood, and his blatant narcissism were on full display for the judge. The court awarded Elara sole physical custody of Leo, with Julian granted only supervised visitation, which he rarely used. The divorce settlement, thanks to the evidence of his corporate malfeasance and infidelity, was far from the nothing he had promised her. It was substantial enough for her to start over not in opulence, but in comfort and independence. The Thorne-Vance empire had crumbled as spectacularly as it had been unveiled. Their backdoor deal for Hudson Yards collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and both of them became subjects of a federal investigation into market manipulation. Their affair, deprived of its glamorous high-stakes backdrop, had soured into bitter recriminations. Last Elara heard, they were suing each other. Julian's mother, Beatrice, had retreated from the social scene, her legacy tainted by her son's public disgrace. Elara sold the Park Avenue penthouse, a place that held only ghosts for her now. She bought a charming brownstone in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, trading sterile panoramic views for a small backyard with a swing set. Her life was smaller, but infinitely more full. It was filled with the sound of Leo's laughter, the smell of his baby shampoo, and the quiet satisfaction of her own work. She had reopened her own small architectural firm, Reyes Design, focusing on sustainable community-oriented projects, the kind of work that nourished her soul, not just her bank account. As she stood on the construction site, her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Leo's nanny. He was at the park, sitting in a pile of autumn leaves, a huge, gummy smile on his face. Her heart swelled. That was her empire. That was her skyline. A man walked up beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. It was Liam, an old friend from her university days, who had been at the gala that night. He was one of the few who had reached out in the aftermath, offering not pity but genuine friendship. He was a landscape architect, and they were collaborating on the community center's garden. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her a cup. His smile was warm and uncomplicated. "It's looking good, Elara. Really good." "Thanks, Liam," she said, taking a sip. "It's a start." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the welders send sparks into the air as they fortified the building's foundation. Elara thought back to that night at the gala, a lifetime ago. Julian had called her his foundation, the bedrock that supported him. He had been wrong. She had never been his foundation. She had been trapped in his basement. Now she was finally building something on her own ground, something strong, something true, something that was meant to last. And it was beautiful. 3 years passed in the fast-paced world of New York City. 3 years could be a lifetime. Kuntuku. For Elara it was. Her firm Reyes design had flourished. She'd earned a reputation for creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but soulful and humane. The Reyes Community Center in Brooklyn was a celebrated success, a vibrant hub of life that had become a model for urban renewal projects. She had won awards, been featured in architectural magazines, and most importantly had built a life of peaceful, joyful stability. Leo was now 4 years old, a whirlwind of energy and laughter, with his mother's bright, curious eyes and a stubborn chin that was all his own. He was the sun around which Elara's universe gracefully orbited. Her relationship with Liam had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and easy camaraderie. He was a gentle, steady presence in both her life and Leo's, a man who knew how to build a garden and nurture a family with the same patient hands. The spectre of Julian Thorne had faded. After the public implosion of his Hudson Yards scheme and the ensuing federal investigation, he had paid a massive fine and retreated from the public eye. The Thorne global empire was a shadow of its former self, and Julian, once the king of the city, had become a ghost. Elara had almost allowed herself to believe he was gone for good. But ghosts have a way of reappearing when you least expect them. It was a crisp Saturday in October. Elara, Liam, and Leo were at the playground in Central Park, the one near the carousel. Leo was shrieking with delight as Liam pushed him on the swings higher and higher. Elara sat on a nearby bench, sipping a warm coffee, a contented smile on her face. This simple, perfect moment was everything she had ever fought for. A beautiful family. The voice was unmistakable, smooth, confident, and laced with a familiar poison. Elara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian Thorne stood there. He looked different, thinner perhaps, with a few more lines etched around his eyes, but still impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than her car. He wasn't looking at her, but at Leo and Liam, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "What are you doing here, Julian?" Elara's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "It's a public park, isn't it?" He finally turned his gaze to her. He attempted a smile, a practiced, charming gesture that no longer reached his eyes. "I wanted to see my son." On the swings, Liam had noticed him. He slowed Leo's arc, his body tensing, his expression becoming guarded. "Your supervised visitation is on the first Sunday of the month at the designated center. You know that. You haven't shown up in 6 months." Elara stated, her tone flat and factual. "Those places are so sterile, impersonal," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I've been doing a lot of work on myself, Elara. Therapy, soul-searching. I realize now how much I lost, how much I pushed away. I just want a chance to be a part of his life. A real part." The words were all correct. They were the words of a changed man. But Elara had spent years studying the nuances of Julian's manipulations. She could see the performance. He was an actor playing a role, and he was watching her intently, gauging her reaction. Liam brought a now quiet Leo over to the bench. Leo, who had only ever seen his biological father in pictures and during a few awkward early visitations, hid behind Liam's legs, peering out with suspicion. "Leo, this is Julian," Elara said softly, her protective instincts screaming. "You must be Liam," Julian said, extending a hand. His smile was wide, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Thank you for stepping in." The words were meant to sound gracious, but they were a clear assertion of territory, a reminder that Liam was merely a replacement. Liam shook his hand briefly, his grip firm. "I'm not stepping in. I'm part of this family." An awkward silence descended. Julian crouched down to Leo's level. "Hello, Leo. I'm your father." Leo just stared, his thumb finding its way into his mouth. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling a small, elegantly wrapped box from his coat pocket. It was a miniature functioning replica of a vintage Aston Martin, a toy so extravagant and out of place for a playground that it was almost comical. Leo looked at the toy, then at his mother. Elara gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. This was a transaction, not a gift. "He doesn't need toys, Julian. He needs a father who shows up," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. Julian's mask of contrition slipped for a second. A flicker of his old, cold anger flashed in his eyes before he masked it again. He stood up, sighing dramatically. "I know I have a lot to make up for. That's why I'm here. I'd like to start spending more time with him. Real time. Here at the park. Maybe take him to a museum. We can discuss it through our lawyers," Elara said, standing up. "Come on, Leo. It's time to go." "Elara, please," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't do this. Don't punish me through him. I'm trying to make amends. For all of us." His sudden plea for sympathy was so audacious, so manipulative, that it almost took her breath away. But as he spoke, she noticed something. A man, sitting on a bench across the green, seemingly reading a newspaper. But the paper was angled just so, and the long lens of the camera tucked beside him was aimed directly at them. The truth hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't about Leo. This wasn't about amends or soul-searching. This was a photo-op. Julian was staging his redemption. The fallen mogul's heartbreaking reunion with his estranged son. It was a calculated PR move to rebuild his shattered image, and he was using their child as a prop. The last shred of her doubt vanished, replaced by a cold-hard fury. The echo of the man who had humiliated her at the gala was standing right here performing the same kind of public manipulation. Only this time the stage was a children's playground. She scooped Leo into her arms, holding him tight. "Get away from us, Julian," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "And tell your photographer he can go home." She turned and walked away, Liam at her side, leaving Julian standing alone by the swings with his expensive unwanted toy. He didn't call after her. The performance was over. His audience was leaving, and the mask had fallen completely. She could feel his silent, venomous rage following her all the way out of the park. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was not the end. It was a declaration of a new kind of war. The staged photos appeared online the next day on a notorious gossip blog. Julian Thorne, a changed man, trying to reconnect with his son, only to be coldly rebuffed by his bitter ex-wife and her new lover. The narrative was expertly crafted, painting him as a victim and her as the villain. It was a classic Julian move. If you can't win the truth, rewrite the story. For a few days the story gained traction, and Elara felt the familiar sting of public judgment. But this time she was not alone, and she was not silent. Her lawyer issued a concise, brutal statement detailing Julian's 6-month absence from scheduled visitations and the convenient presence of a paparazzi photographer at his spontaneous park visit. Public opinion, already wary of Julian, swung swiftly and decisively back against him. The attempt to use his son for PR backfired, making him look even more monstrous and calculating than before. It was the last straw. Enraged and publicly humiliated once again, Julian came for her. Not with lawyers or photographers, but with the raw, desperate fury of a king who had lost his kingdom and his power. He showed up at the grand reopening of the Reyes Community Center. It was the center's 3rd anniversary, and the event was a celebration of everything Elara had built. The main hall, a soaring space of reclaimed wood, exposed brick and vast windows she had designed, was filled with neighborhood families, local leaders, and the joyful noise of children. Elara was on a small stage, thanking the community with Liam and a happy tuxedo-clad Leo beside her. And then she saw him. Julian was standing at the back of the room, a thunderous expression on his face. He began to walk forward, his presence sucking the warmth and joy out of the air. The crowd parted, a wave of unease rippling through the room. He stopped at the foot of the small stage, looking up at her. "This is quite the little empire you've built," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "All on my money, of course. You should be thanking me." Elara's heart pounded, but her voice was calm as she spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she said to the stunned crowd. "It seems we have one final unscheduled donor to acknowledge." She handed Leo to Liam, who gently led him to the side, shielding him. She stepped down from the stage to face Julian on the floor on his level. She was no longer looking down on him, nor was she cowering beneath him. They were for the first time equals. "You have nothing, Julian," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Your money didn't build this. This was built with talent and hard work. It was built with integrity. Concepts you wouldn't understand." "Integrity?" He scoffed, his voice rising. "Don't you dare preach to me about integrity. I picked you up from nothing. You were a small town girl with a portfolio of quaint little drawings. I gave you a name. I gave you a life. I gave you a son, and you threw it all away. You didn't give me anything, Julian. You tried to cage me," she corrected him, her gaze unwavering. "You thought I was a project you could build and then abandon like one of your glass towers. But you made a mistake. You thought my foundation was you. You were wrong." She gestured around the room, at the children, laughing at the families, talking at the vibrant art on the walls. "This is my foundation. Truth, community, love. Things you can't buy or bully or manipulate. You stand here in a house that truth built, and you are a ghost. Your empire was a house of cards Julian built on lies and secrets. It was destined to fall." He stared at her, his face contorted with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate. He had come here for a final public showdown, expecting to shatter her with his presence, to remind her of his power. But his words had no effect. His anger was a storm breaking against a sea wall. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She pitied him. In her calm, pitying eyes, Julian Thorne finally saw his own defeat. It wasn't a legal loss or a financial one. It was a total spiritual annihilation. He had no power here. He had no power over her. He was irrelevant. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the building. No one watched him go. The life of the party, the community immediately swelled to fill the space he had vacated, the joyful noise returning as if he had never been there at all. Elara watched the door swing shut behind him, and for the first time she felt the last heavy chain of her past fall away. Liam came to her side, his hand finding hers. Leo ran to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs. She looked around the beautiful bustling room she had designed, at the smiling face of the man she loved, and at the bright, hopeful eyes of her son. She had once been the silent, pregnant wife, publicly shamed at a gala. Now she was the celebrated architect of her own life, standing strong in the house she had built, not from the ashes of her old life, but on a brand new, unshakable foundation of her own making. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was, and always had been, about her. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest breakdowns lead to our most profound breakthroughs. The night that should have been her ultimate humiliation became the moment of her liberation. She walked through the fire of public betrayal and emerged not as a victim, but as the architect of her own new life. Her journey from the gilded cage of Park Avenue to a place of true self-worth and happiness is a testament to the incredible strength that lies within us, often waiting for a crisis to be unleashed. If Elara's journey from heartbreak to empowerment moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever witnessed a moment where the truth exploded in the most public way possible? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening.
Poor wife walks in on millionaire proposing to mistress. What she does next will shock you. When Maria Delgado pushed open the ornate doors to the private dining room, she was expecting a quiet evening with her millionaire husband, Jacob. Instead, she found him kneeling before another woman, an extravagant ring poised between his trembling fingers. In that split second, her world shattered like delicate porcelain dropped from a great height. Emotions warred inside her: shock, betrayal, fury. But what Maria did next defied every expectation. The consequences of that decisive moment would reverberate through high society circles, revealing secret alliances, shattered trust, and a woman's quest to carve her own destiny out of the chaos her husband had unleashed. Maria Delgado had been raised to believe in the power of love. Born in a modest suburb of Philadelphia, she'd spent her childhood studying hard, watching her parents work long hours, and learning the value of perseverance. Love, in her eyes, was meant to be honorable, a sacred promise that transcended time and adversity. So, when she married Jacob Delgado, an unassuming man at the time, who later skyrocketed to wealth, she believed their union was fated. Everything about Jacob back then spoke of ambition tempered by warmth, a thirst for success supported by a deep devotion to her. They married in their mid-20s, beginning with a modest apartment in downtown Philadelphia. While he climbed the rungs of the real estate development world, Maria supported them both by teaching music lessons to neighborhood kids. She beamed with pride each time Jacob closed a deal that brought them a step closer to his dream, building an empire. Through the nascent years of their marriage, every victory was shared. Every setback was consoled by the other. The couple felt invincible. As Jacob's fortunes grew, so did his interests, and the city seemed too small for his evolving ambitions. With the promise of even greater success, he uprooted them to New York. Over time, he transformed from the modest man Maria once knew into someone revered by the upper echelons of Manhattan's elite. He became known for orchestrating multi-million-dollar real estate ventures. Their modest apartment turned into a lavish penthouse overlooking Central Park. From dressing in simple button-down shirts to adorning himself in bespoke suits from Savile Row, Jacob thrived in the glitz and glamour of high society life. Maria was proud of him, of course, but with each acquisition, Each expansion, each lavish party thrown by Manhattan's wealthy set, she began to sense something intangible slipping away. The sweet, humble spark in Jacob's eyes was being replaced by a relentless desire for more. Their shared dinners became fewer and fewer. Their conversations, once intimately about dreams and daily life, revolved around boardroom strategies and the constant hum of new deals. Where there was once closeness, an unspoken chasm was opening. Still, Maria was no stranger to sacrifice. She believed that a marriage demanded effort and understanding. She accepted that his time was consumed by meetings, power lunches with foreign investors, and charity galas where he networked. She made space for his blossoming empire and refused to let suspicion take root. If he was distant, she told herself, it was because he was tired. If his phone rang at odd hours, it was because that was how the real estate world worked. She clung to the memory of that earnest young man who held her hand in their first tiny kitchen, dreaming of a brighter future together. But all illusions can shatter. Late one evening, after one of his countless events, Jacob casually mentioned that he wanted to take her to an exclusive restaurant the next night. Belafonte's, perched high above the city with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sparkling skyline. Maria's heart fluttered. A private dinner just for them, exactly what they needed to revive their bond. She felt a spark of hope that maybe their relationship could rekindle, that the old Jacob would re-emerge, if only for a night. The following day, she dressed with care in a flowing, emerald green gown. She recalled how green was Jacob's favorite color on her, how he'd often say her eyes looked like precious jewels when she wore it. She left their penthouse with trembling excitement, not wanting to arrive too early, but also conscious that the invitation had felt momentous, like something significant was in store. When she reached the restaurant, an attentive maitre greeted her by name and led her down a corridor to a discreet, gold-trimmed door. Soft piano music flowed from within. Her heart pounded, imagining a candlelit room just for the two of them. Instead, as the door swung open, she stumbled upon a scene she could never have prepared for. Jacob, down on one knee, proposing to a statuesque blonde woman, his mistress, whose face Maria recognized from hushed rumors at parties and unconfirmed gossip in tabloids. The ring in Jacob's hand sparkled like a fallen star, captured by the overhead chandelier's light. Time froze, capturing her shock, the mistress's gasp, and Jacob's horrified expression in an excruciating tableau. Maria felt dizzy, her sense of reality splintering. Memories of their simple days in Philadelphia flooded her mind. Her hands shook as she clutched the handle of the door for support. She sensed the maitre d' quickly slip away, likely to avoid the pending explosion. The look on Jacob's face rapidly morphed from romantic fervor to utter panic. How long has this been going on? Maria finally managed to choke out, voice trembling. The blonde woman, Annalise Winslow, as Maria would later learn, stepped back, her hand protectively covering the ring that Jacob had tried to slip on her finger. She had a deer-in-headlights look, as if she had expected this moment, but not in such a brutal collision of truths. "Maria," Jacob began, rising slowly from his knee, "it's not what it looks like." A pit of molten anger rose in Maria's chest. The anguish burned, pried open by betrayal. She glanced at the ring Jacob was holding. It wasn't a tiny diamond. It was a massive rock, overshadowing the modest ring she herself had worn with pride for years. Everything about this was a sickening confirmation of what she had refused to suspect. She refused to let him see her crumble, her eyes brimming with unshed tears locked onto Jacob's. "For once in your life," she said, voice trembling yet steel-edged, "tell me the truth." Jacob glanced between Maria and Annalise. Shame flickered across his expression, but only for a moment before resolve set in. In a voice that cracked, he said, "I was going to explain it after this. I never wanted you to find out this way." He was trying to speak gently, but Maria found it galling. Here, in a lavish, private dining room that cost more per meal than some people earned in a month, her husband was kneeling before another woman with an engagement ring. Her world felt false, illusions shattered like shards of broken glass. But instead of running, instead of screaming or hurling every insult she could muster, Maria inhaled. She decided then and there that she wouldn't collapse. Not now, not ever. With a composure that surprised even herself, she said, "Fine." She tugged off her wedding band, the simple gold band that had once symbolized their hopeful union. She placed it gently on the nearest table, right next to a silver platter meant for some extravagant dinner. She looked at Annalise, whose cheeks had gone pale. "Congratulations," Maria said icily. "You've caught a big fish. I hope you both choke on it." She turned on her heel, ignoring Jacob's pleas for her to wait. She walked out with her head held high, tears threatening to fall but refusing to let them out until she was out of that stifling, perfumed environment. Little did either of them know, Maria's next actions would set off a chain reaction of hidden truths, corporate betrayals, and unexpected alliances that would ultimately turn the power dynamics of their world on its head. Maria spent the night at a friend's townhouse near Gramercy Park. This friend, Jennifer Robertson, was one of the few people Maria trusted implicitly. Jennifer, a lawyer by profession, had seen far too many wealthy husbands try to con their wives out of rightful settlements. In the warmly lit living room, Maria recounted the horrifying scene. Jennifer listened quietly, her arms folded, eyes flashing indignation at Jacob's betrayal. When Maria finally finished, the tears she had held back since the restaurant began to slide down her cheeks. Jennifer promptly pulled her into a hug. "Maria," she murmured, "this is terrible, but you're not going through it alone. This time, you have to look out for yourself." Maria sniffled, still reeling. "I never thought. All those business trips, all those late nights." Jennifer tightened her grip. "People like Jacob, they think they can have everything. The wife, the mistress, the image of perfection. You don't deserve that." Maria wiped her tears. A cold anger took root in her heart, overshadowing her sorrow. She had sacrificed too much, believed in Jacob too long. Perhaps she'd been naive, but there was no time left for self-pity. "What do I do?" she asked, gazing at Jennifer. "I'm not going to just let him throw me away." Jennifer pursed her lips, then reached for her phone. "First, we need to call Patrick Hodges, one of the top divorce attorneys in New York. He'll know exactly what to do. The Delgado empire might have been built by Jacob, but you've stood beside him every step of the way. New York law won't ignore that." For hours into the night, they planned. Jennifer explained the complexities of high-asset divorces, the myriad ways spouses try to hide money. They dissected the financial empire Jacob had built, the real estate ventures, the offshore accounts rumored by some to exist, the charity foundations that he might use as tax shelters. Maria listened, took notes, and found her heartbreak morphing into a dogged determination. If Jacob thought he could so brazenly propose to another woman, he was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, Maria woke from a fitful sleep. She rose, showered, and dressed in a simple black outfit. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes rimmed with sadness, yet also lit by an undercurrent of resolve. She thought about that shocking moment in the restaurant. It had been mere hours since her life was turned inside out, yet it felt like an eternity. An unexpected wave of curiosity washed over her. What kind of woman was Annalise Winslow, beyond the honey-blonde hair and designer gown? How long had Annalise waited in the wings for Jacob to propose? Maria's mind churned with possibilities. Was she manipulated by Jacob's power, or was she the manipulator? Determined to cut through the speculation, Maria decided she wanted facts. She dialed a private investigator's number, someone recommended by Jennifer. a man named Richard Pine, known in certain circles for his thorough, discreet approach. Maria remembered meeting him briefly at a philanthropic event. He'd been introduced to her as the best man to find what's hidden. If there was dirt to be dug up, Richard Pine could unearth it. Within an hour, Maria was sitting in a small, upscale coffee shop near Union Square. Face to face with Richard, he was a sturdy man in his mid-50s, with kind but calculating eyes. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Delgado?" he asked in a measured tone, sipping his espresso. Maria inhaled slowly. "I found my husband proposing to another woman last night," she said, voice unwavering. "I need to know everything about her, her background, her motivations, any skeletons in her closet." Richard set down his cup, making the slightest grimace. "I'm sorry to hear that. Cheating spouses are unfortunately too common in my line of work. But let's talk specifics. What do you already know about this woman?" "Her name is Annalise Winslow. I believe she's from Los Angeles originally. She's in her mid-20s, definitely younger than me or Jacob. Rumor has it she used to be a model, or maybe a socialite. I'm not entirely sure." Richard nodded, scribbling notes. "Understood. I'll compile everything I can find. Miss Winslow's finances, connections, travel history, job history, whatever might help. And I assume you also want me to keep an eye on Jacob's dealings?" He lifted an eyebrow knowingly. "Yes," Maria replied firmly. "I have a strong feeling there's more to this than just an affair. I want to know if he's been hiding money or if he's planning to move assets out of the country. Anything that can help me get some measure of justice when we go to court, or even before that." Richard nodded again. "I'll be in touch soon." Maria thanked him and left, feeling that with each step she was moving deeper into a labyrinth where she had to be the one calling the shots. She wasn't merely a scorned wife. She was becoming an orchestrator of her own destiny. By afternoon, Maria knew she could no longer avoid returning to the penthouse. She needed her clothes, her documents, her life. She braced herself for the confrontation that was inevitable. Summoning what courage she had, she took a taxi to the towering building that had once felt like a dream come true. Its gleaming marble lobby now felt foreign. She ascended in the private elevator, her heart pounding, stomach in knots. As she slid the keycard and the doors to the penthouse opened, she heard Jacob's voice carrying down the corridor. To her surprise, he wasn't alone. She recognized the female voice, Annalise. They seemed to be arguing. Maria took a moment to listen. Through the grand foyer, she could make out the two silhouettes in the living area. She heard Annalise's voice, tight with anger. "You said you'd handle this differently. Now everyone's talking about it like some scandal. How do you think this makes me look?" Jacob hissed back. "You think I planned for Maria to walk in? God, Annalise, I'm juggling a million things. The board at Delgado Holdings is going to be furious if this leaks to the press. This was supposed to be discreet." Maria felt a twinge of savage satisfaction hearing the cracks form in their alliance. With her shoulders set, she stepped forward, letting her heels clack on the polished floor. Jacob and Annalise whirled around, identical expressions of shock distorting their features. "Maria," Jacob started, lifting a hand in an entreaty, but Maria's gaze was locked onto Annalise. Up close, the mistress was undeniably striking tall, poised with carefully styled waves of golden hair. Yet Maria noticed a flicker of insecurity behind that controlled exterior. "Good," she thought. "I'm not the only one rattled. I just came to get my things," Maria said plainly. "Then I'll leave, and you two can celebrate your engagement in peace." Annalise's shoulders relaxed, but her eyes narrowed in faint challenge. Jacob stepped forward. "Maria, wait. I think we should talk." She laughed mirthlessly. "Talk? That's what you wanted to do? You were going to propose to her, Jacob. Don't pretend there's any middle ground here." And honestly, what do I have to say to you? Congratulations. Jacob's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. Actually, it is, Maria snapped, her emotions flaring. You made a choice, a public choice no less. I can't undo that, and I won't be your doormat. Annalise crossed her arms, lips pressed together, as though restraining herself from retorting. Maria caught the fleeting glance she gave Jacob, some mixture of fear and entitlement. It dawned on Maria that Annalise may have feared losing the security Jacob's fortune promised. The scorned wife's presence in the penthouse complicated matters for the mistress, who presumably dreamed of living here in style. Just take whatever you need, Jacob said after a moment. We don't need to fight in front of her. Maria's chest constricted, memories of 1,000 shared moments in this home swirling in her mind. But she suppressed the pain and moved calmly to the master bedroom, which was filled with expensive furnishings and the faint scent of the cologne Jacob once gifted her. She methodically packed a suitcase with her clothes and personal items. Her fingertips lingered on a framed photo of them in front of their first store-bought Christmas tree back in their humble Philadelphia apartment. She set it aside, not wanting to carry something so laden with nostalgia. As she re-entered the living area, she caught a glimpse of Annalise's engagement ring glinting in the afternoon light. Rage flared again, but she forced composure, reminding herself that she had a plan. Once she had everything she needed, she paused at the door, turning back to them. Jacob, she said, I've asked Patrick Hodges to represent me. If you want to avoid a scorched earth divorce, I suggest you speak to your attorney. Annalise's eyes flared at the mention of divorce. Possibly it hammered home the reality that Maria wasn't just going to vanish quietly. Jacob's face fell. He tried to speak, but words failed him. In that charged silence, Maria left. She felt hollow, but also strangely empowered. The woman who had walked in on her husband's betrayal mere hours ago was no longer the same, and what awaited her next was a labyrinth of hidden truths. Over the next week, Manhattan buzzed with rumors. The Delgado name had become a fixture of high society galas and philanthropic events. Whispers circulated through penthouse brunches, exclusive clubs, and midnight parties. Jacob Delgado had not only cheated on Maria, but had proposed to his mistress. The gossip columns ate it up. Real estate mogul's secret engagement was the headline in at least one online publication. People debated whether Maria was blindsided or complicit, whether she'd stay or go, and what the mistress was like. In the meantime, Patrick Hodges, the formidable divorce attorney, laid out a roadmap for Maria. They met in his sleek midtown office, with Jennifer present as moral support. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the hustle and bustle of Manhattan below, as though showing a world that never slept, never paused for heartbreak. Maria, Patrick said in a calm, almost fatherly tone, Jacob's net worth is estimated at around $700 million. We need to act fast to ensure he doesn't move assets out of reach. 700 million, Maria echoed, stunned, though she knew the figure hovered in that range. She had watched his success balloon over the years, but to hear it stated so plainly shook her. She'd never placed a dollar value on their relationship. Patrick continued, We'll file motions to freeze a significant portion of his assets until the court rules on equitable distribution. But be ready, his legal team will fight. Also, the prenuptial agreement. We need to see if that holds up in court. Maria's brow furrowed. We had a prenup, but it was signed before his empire expanded like this. Back then, he had almost nothing. I never thought it would come to this. Patrick flipped through documents. Yes, it's from 15 years ago, but we have grounds to challenge it if certain conditions have changed significantly, or if you can prove undue influence or anything along those lines. After all, you supported him morally and even financially in the early years. Jennifer chimed in, Don't forget about the potential hidden offshore accounts. Rumors are swirling that he might be moving investments to the Cayman Islands. Maria felt her insides twist. Every layer of betrayal deepened her resolve. Let's do whatever it takes. I don't want to be cruel. I just want what's fair. But if Jacob tries to shortchange me after all I've done to help him, then I'm ready to fight. Patrick gave a firm nod. I'll coordinate with your investigator, Richard Pine. We'll uncover any hidden income streams or suspicious accounts. In the meantime, you need to remain calm. These next few weeks will be a roller coaster. Maria exhaled. She glanced at Jennifer, who squeezed her hand. This was war, and she was prepared. Late one night, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She tapped it open and saw, "I have information about Annalise. Meet me at Calderwood Cafe, 9 am tomorrow. R.P. Richard Pine." She felt a rush of anticipation. The next morning she arrived at the cozy Calderwood Cafe, known for its artisanal pastries and discreet atmosphere. Richard sat at a corner table, leafing through a manila folder. Maria slid into the chair opposite him. "So, what have you found?" Richard leaned forward, voice low. "Quite a bit, actually. Annalise Winslow is from Los Angeles. That much is true. She started off as a pageant contestant in her teens, then moved into small-time modeling gigs, mostly promotional events. After that, she tried to break into Hollywood. She had a few minor roles, nothing significant. Maria listened intently as Richard continued. She married briefly at 19 to a man named Parker Bloom, an older talent manager. The marriage lasted less than a year, and she walked away with a sizable alimony settlement, allegations of emotional abuse from both sides, but nothing proven. After that, she moved to New York around 3 years ago. She's been living in high-end apartments, though it's unclear how she's been affording them. "So she's a gold digger," Maria muttered, disgust curling in her stomach. Richard shrugged. "She's adept at finding wealthy men, that much is clear. And from phone records I accessed, it seems she was seeing Jacob for at least a year before you caught them." Maria's chest clenched. A year. She felt her hands tremble momentarily. For a year, her husband had been living a double life. "Go on," she prompted, forcing composure. "Her finances are shaky. She maintains appearances, but she's leveraged with credit card debt, living off gifts from older boyfriends. I also found something else, some suspicion that she was previously connected to a money laundering scheme, though nothing concrete enough for an arrest. She's cunning. She knows how to navigate the wealthy circles and keep her secrets hidden." Maria's mind spun. She pictured Annalise draped on Jacob's arm, whispering sweet words to him while systematically securing her future with his money. This was no mere fling. This was a calculated move by an opportunist. It didn't absolve Jacob, he was equally to blame, a grown man who should have seen the red flags. But it changed how Maria viewed the dynamic. "How can I use this information?" she asked. Richard folded his hands. "Your legal team can introduce this as evidence that Annalise might be pushing Jacob to move assets, or that she might have a questionable background that affects the case. While it doesn't directly influence your divorce settlement, it can shed light on Jacob's credibility and motives." Maria nodded slowly. "Thank you, Richard. This is incredibly helpful." She closed the folder, feeling her spirits lift for a moment. This was more than just heartbreak. Now it was a mission to protect herself from two cunning players. She had let love blind her to Jacob's changes, but she would not let it blind her to her own future. While the divorce proceedings were set in motion, Jacob Delgado faced a crisis of his own. The Delgado Holdings Board of Directors had caught wind of the scandal. The reason? A major investor, Keiji Nakamura, who had planned to pour hundreds of millions into Delgado Holdings' new project, was now hesitant. The fiasco with Jacob's personal life signaled instability at the helm, and big money despises instability. A week later, in the elegant conference room at Delgado Holdings headquarters, Jacob was grilled by the board. The walls were lined with modern art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. But the tension inside was palpable. Men and women in suits, representing some of the largest financial institutions, demanded answers. Board member Regina Charles, a tough-as-nails executive with silver-streaked hair, eyed Jacob coldly. "We're not here to judge your personal decisions," she began, "but your behavior is affecting our business." Mr. Nakamura is spooked. He stalled negotiations because he doesn't like the negative press associated with your, shall we say, public affair. Jacob attempted a confident posture. "We can handle this," he said. "Nakamura's concerns are about the stability of the company. I can assure you Delgado Holdings is stronger than ever." Regina's sharp gaze didn't waver. "Your wife, Maria Delgado, has been a visible figure at charitable events linked to this company. She was involved, albeit unofficially, in several philanthropic partnerships. Her departure in such a scandalous way raises questions. We need to ensure no crisis of confidence escalates." Jacob felt his insides tighten. The narrative was twisting. Maria was no longer just his wife. She was an extension of the brand he had built. He stifled the desire to lash out at the board's insinuation that his personal life was fair game. "Instead," he insisted, "I'm working on controlling the narrative. We'll handle the press. And as for Maria, once the divorce is settled, we can present a unified, amicable front." Regina's lips formed a thin line. "Jacob, we hired a PR team. They've strongly advised that we do damage control before the next shareholders' meeting. That might involve statements from both you and Maria, something to quell rumors of a messy divorce that could sabotage investor confidence. Besides, have you considered the ramifications if Miss Delgado takes you to the cleaners financially?" Jacob's frustration peaked. "I have attorneys for that," he snapped. "We'll handle it." The rest of the board members exchanged looks. One of them, Arnold Powell, tried to lighten the tone. "Look, we just need reassurance that Delgado Holdings won't implode from a personal scandal. If you can't get it under control, we might have to explore leadership changes." That was the ultimate threat, a coup at his own company. Jacob forced a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "There will be no need for that. Trust me." As the meeting adjourned, Jacob was left alone for a moment. His reflection in the glossy surface of the boardroom table looked older, more stressed. He thought of Maria's eyes the last time he saw her, brimming with betrayal. Then he thought of Annalise, upset with the negative attention. For the first time, he questioned if the precarious web he'd spun was worth the cost. But it was too late. The avalanche had already begun. In a twist that neither Maria nor Jacob could have predicted, help came from an unexpected quarter, Jacob's estranged sister, Daniela Delgado. She had parted ways with the family years earlier, after disagreeing with Jacob on a major business decision that led to a bitter falling out. Since then, Daniela had built her own path, creating a successful interior design firm. She'd always admired Maria's kindness from afar and held contempt for Jacob's ruthless ambition. Out of the blue, Daniela reached out to Maria. She called one evening while Maria was reviewing documents with Jennifer. "Maria, this is Daniela, Jacob's sister." Maria's initial shock shifted into curiosity. "Yes, Daniela. The first remember you. We haven't spoken in ages." "Look," Daniela said, "I heard about what happened. I don't blame you if you don't want to talk. But I have information about a couple of major real estate deals. Jacob's been working on things that might be relevant to your divorce. If you're interested, meet me at the Silverwood Lounge tomorrow night at 8. Maria hesitated. Jacob had mentioned Daniela only rarely, and it was always laced with bitterness. Yet something told her Daniela might be sincere. "I'll be there," she said, surprising even herself. The next night, Maria walked into the Silverwood Lounge, a chic bar with velvet drapes and soft jazz music. Daniela, a petite woman with sharp features, waved from a corner booth. She wore a stylish black suit and maintained a guarded expression. "Thank you for meeting me," Daniela said, offering a polite nod as Maria sat down. Maria studied Jacob's sister. "I'm surprised you reached out. Jacob never said good things about you." Daniela smirked. "Likewise. He painted you as the obedient wife who turned a blind eye to his shadier deals. But I knew that wasn't you. We might not have been close, but I always saw your kindness." Now, about his real estate dealings. She opened her handbag and pulled out a USB drive. These are documents that point to a series of shell companies linked to Delgado Holdings. I suspect he's been funneling money offshore. Years back, he tried to get me to help launder funds through interior design contracts. I refused, and that's partly why we fell out. He threatened me to keep quiet. Maria's eyes widened. She carefully took the USB drive. If these documents were legitimate, they could be a game changer. "Why help me now?" Daniela's eyes flickered with something akin to regret. "Because Jacob's arrogance has gone too far. He's forgotten family loyalty and moral boundaries. If he wants to destroy you, the one decent aspect of his life, I won't stand for it. And, to be transparent, I want him to face consequences for all the times he's bullied and blackmailed anyone who stood in his way." Maria tucked the USB drive into her purse. She studied Daniela carefully, trying to gauge sincerity. "Thank you," she said eventually. "I'll have my lawyer look at this. I appreciate your honesty." Daniela gave a single nod. "Just be careful. He'll retaliate if he feels cornered. Jacob Delgado is still my brother, and I know what he's capable of." Fear nudged at Maria's heart, but it was overshadowed by her determination. She swore to herself that she wouldn't let fear rule her anymore. Jacob had shattered her trust and flaunted his betrayal in a way that threatened her entire future. She wouldn't stand idly by. While Maria gathered information, Annalise Winslow was not idle. She realized Jacob was in a precarious position. The negative press, the board's dissatisfaction, and now the looming divorce threatened to erode the luxurious future she had counted on. In whispered phone calls, she pressed Jacob to finalize their engagement, to secure her name in the Delgado fortune before it slipped away. Yet Jacob delayed, promising to fix everything first. Uncertain of Jacob's ability to protect her interests, Annalise took matters into her own hands. She arranged a private lunch with one of Jacob's longtime associates, a banker named Charles Montclair. He was known to handle offshore transactions for Delgado Holdings. At a chic bistro on the Upper East Side, she met Charles in a secluded corner. "Jacob trusts you, right?" she asked, swirling her wineglass. She wore a designer dress, exuding confidence, even though her heart pounded with nerves. Charles nodded slowly. "We've done business together for years." Annalise leaned forward, letting her voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. "Good, because I want to guarantee that if things go south, I'm protected." Charles raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall order." Jacob keeps his financial dealings close to the vest. A sly smile tugged at Annalise's lips. "I'm sure he does. But I also know Delgado Holdings is possibly moving money in ways that aren't entirely above board. If you help me get a piece of the pie quietly, I'll make it worth your while. I have connections in L.A. that might interest you." Charles swallowed. He was no stranger to morally dubious requests, but this was bolder than most. Still, money talked. "What do you propose?" "I propose you set me up with an offshore account. A small percentage of whatever Jacob moves. I don't care if it's 1 million or 10 million, as long as I have something to fall back on. In return, I'll keep my mouth shut if the authorities come knocking." Charles looked uneasy. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. This could be risky. But I'll see what I can do. Annalise nodded, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. She felt a thrill at the prospect of securing her own fortune. She was tired of waiting for Jacob to deliver. If he was going to let his empire crumble, she'd salvage what she could. The divorce proceedings accelerated. Under the scrutiny of Patrick Hodges, Jacob's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They argued that the prenuptial agreement limited Maria's entitlement to a fraction of the current fortune. But Patrick introduced evidence that Maria's early support had directly facilitated Jacob's meteoric rise. Financial experts testified about intangible contributions, spousal support, and the validity of a prenup signed under potentially misleading circumstances. Behind closed doors, settlement negotiations were intense. One afternoon, in a wood-paneled conference room in the courthouse, Maria and Jacob faced each other while their lawyers sparred over details. The tension was suffocating. Jacob's lead attorney, Garrett Rhodes, glared over his wire-rimmed glasses. "My client is offering a significant settlement, $20 million. That's more than generous, given the prenuptial agreement." Maria's lawyer, Patrick, shot back. $20 million is a pittance compared to the Delgado empire. "My client deserves equitable distribution, especially in light of the new evidence we'll be presenting about hidden assets." Garrett stiffened. "What evidence?" Patrick laid out the file containing Daniela's USB drive findings, shell companies, suspicious transfers, and potential tax evasion. Maria noticed Jacob's face flush with anger. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. "If you don't want the courts delving into these matters," Patrick said calmly, "it would be wise to offer a fair settlement and quickly." Garrett looked to Jacob, who cleared his throat. "This is ridiculous," Jacob muttered. "Maria, we can handle this privately. Let's not blow up everything we built." Maria's anger flared. "We didn't build anything together anymore, Jacob. You destroyed that. I just want what I'm legally entitled to, nothing less." Before Jacob could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, features hardening. "Excuse me," he said, rising and stepping outside. Maria exchanged a look with her lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. She felt a pang in her chest, remembering the man she once loved. But she'd come too far to yield. Moments later, Jacob returned, face grim. "There's a situation at Delgado Holdings. I need to attend to it. We'll resume this later." He left with Garrett, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. Patrick exhaled and turned to Maria. "He's rattled. That's good. But we need to keep the pressure on." She nodded, her mind swirling with possibilities. Jacob had always thrived under pressure, but this was a new realm of stress, public scandal, bored dissatisfaction, a vengeful sister revealing his secrets, a cunning mistress, and a betrayed wife fighting back. If anyone understood the empire's vulnerability, it was Maria, and now she had no reason to protect it. Jacob discovered what the phone call was about. Keiji Nakamura had officially withdrawn his large investment due to the ongoing negative publicity and internal instability at Delgado Holdings. The blow was catastrophic. Stocks dipped, the board was livid, rumors of a hostile takeover circulated. Jacob's once iron grip on his empire was loosening. In the days that followed, tabloids feasted on fresh gossip. Leaked whispers suggested that Jacob's mistress was demanding a rush wedding and that the Delgado board was considering a forced resignation if the crisis continued. Jacob's face, once glowing with ambition, now appeared haggard. The carefully curated facade of success was crumbling faster than he could salvage it. At Annalise's insistence, Jacob tried to offer her a lavish ceremony in some exotic locale, hoping a quick marriage might quell some rumors and secure her unwavering support. But the board frowned at any attempt that would further sensationalize his personal life. An internal power struggle erupted, with some directors pressuring Jacob to step down temporarily. Regina Charles especially had sharpened her stance, aligning with a faction that believed Delgado Holdings needed a new figurehead to reassure investors. In a desperate bid to maintain control, Jacob made a public statement. Cameras flashed as he stepped before a cluster of reporters outside the Delgado Holdings headquarters. He wore a dark suit, face set in an expression of forced calm. "I would like to address recent speculations regarding my personal life," he began, voice subdued. "I am currently going through a divorce process, and I request privacy and respect during this challenging time. Delgado Holdings remains strong, and we are fully committed to our ongoing projects. The unfortunate withdrawal of Mr. Nakamura's investment does not diminish our stability." He continued with corporate platitudes, but the reporters clamored for more personal answers. "What about the mistress? Are you engaged already?" one asked. Jacob ignored it, reading from his carefully prepared statement. But the damage was done. In the public's eye, he was the faithless millionaire with something to hide. Watching the coverage from Jennifer's townhouse, Maria felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had loved that man once. Now he was a stranger, fighting to keep illusions intact. But illusions always come at a price. She reminded herself of that truth. As the divorce hearing approached, tension reached a fever pitch. Patrick Hodges received a call from Garrett Rhodes, requesting a private meeting, just the lawyers and their clients, with no media or court officials. Maria and Jennifer drove to the law firm's office, hearts pounding. They were ushered into a sleek conference room. Jacob, Garrett, Patrick, and a stone-faced Annalise were already seated around a polished table. Maria ignored the pang of seeing Annalise by Jacob's side. She focused on the fact that the mistress's presence was highly unusual in a divorce negotiation. Garrett cleared his throat. "We've come with a proposition. Mr. Delgado is prepared to offer a settlement of $100 million plus the Manhattan penthouse in exchange for Miss Delgado signing a non-disclosure agreement, no further revelations about Delgado Holdings or Mr. Delgado's personal affairs. We want to handle this quietly and move on." Maria's eyes flickered. 100 million was vastly larger than the initial offer. She glanced at Patrick, who gave a subtle nod, indicating it was a substantial proposition. Yet something felt off. Her gaze slid to Annalise, who looked uncharacteristically tense. Patrick spoke up. "It's a generous offer, but we need to verify if there are no further conditions. Also, the NDA's scope must be clarified. Miss Delgado has the right to discuss her personal experiences freely." Jacob cut in, voice sharp. "I don't want my ex-wife airing dirty laundry. We sign this. We end it. Maria, you go your way, I go mine." Maria's heart raced. 100 million could secure her future, free her from the stress, and let her start anew. It was a fortune beyond her wildest imagination back when they were newlyweds sharing cheap takeout. But then her gaze settled on Annalise, who avoided eye contact. Maria recalled the shady deals and the knowledge that Delgado Holdings was unraveling behind the scenes. She realized that if she accepted the offer blindly, she might be stepping into a trap, allowing Jacob to cover up potential crimes and injustice. She licked her lips, choosing her words carefully. "Jacob, I appreciate the offer, but I won't sign anything until I'm sure you're not hiding more. I don't need your hush money if it means letting you and Annalise ruin more lives." Anger flashed in Jacob's eyes. "You're letting bitterness cloud your judgment. Think of what 100 million can do for you." Annalise finally spoke, voice hesitant. "Maria, please. There's no need to drag this out. We can all walk away with dignity." Maria almost laughed at the irony of Annalise talking about dignity. Instead, she closed her eyes, remembering the heartbreak of that night at Belafonte's. Then she thought of the fear and manipulation that might still lurk if she let Jacob walk away scot-free. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I'm not making a decision today." Garrett, Jacob's lawyer, looked frustrated. "We need an answer soon. Otherwise, we proceed to court." "Then we proceed to court," Patrick replied calmly. "We'll see you there." The tension was palpable as they stood to leave. Jacob locked eyes with Maria. "Don't do this," he said softly, an echo of the old Jacob appearing for a split second. "We can solve this quietly." She met his gaze, seeing the man she once loved drowned out by layers of betrayal. "If you had wanted things quiet, you wouldn't have proposed to your mistress in a public place." The day of the official court hearing dawned cloudy and brisk. Photographers and reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Maria arrived with Patrick, Jennifer, and a small security detail. Whispers followed her. She was no longer just a betrayed wife, she was the woman who might topple a millionaire's empire. Rumors swirled that she possessed damning evidence of fraud. Jacob and Annalise arrived separately, escorted by their own legal team. People craned their necks to catch a glimpse, cameras clicking furiously. He looked tense, shoulders stiff under his tailored suit. Annalise kept her chin high, though she lingered behind Jacob, as if wary of the scrutiny. Inside the large, wood-panelled courtroom, the judge, a stern woman named Honorable Denise Faraday, called the session to order. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. On the surface, it was a high-profile divorce, but in reality, it was a battleground for corporate secrets, personal vengeance, and heartbreak. Patrick presented Maria's case with meticulous detail, her contributions to Jacob's early success, the suspicious financial maneuvers uncovered by Daniela and Richard Pine, and the emotional distress caused by Jacob's public betrayal. Garrett rebutted by citing the prenup, painting Maria as vengeful, seeking more than she deserved. Midway through the proceedings, Patrick introduced a surprise witness, Daniela Delgado. She stepped forward, looking poised and determined. Her testimony about Jacob's shell companies, backed by email chains and financial documents, sent waves of shock through the courtroom. The tension climbed higher when she revealed that she had confronted Jacob years ago about money laundering allegations, which he had vehemently denied. When cross-examined by Garrett, Daniela stayed firm. "I have no reason to lie," she said quietly, "other than to expose wrongdoing. My brother has threatened me, but I won't be silent anymore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jacob's face was a mask of barely contained fury. For Maria, hearing Daniela stand up for the truth was both validating and heartbreaking. This was the family she once thought she had. Then it was Annalise's turn on the stand. She was visibly nervous, glancing repeatedly at Jacob for reassurance. Under Patrick's probing questions, she admitted to the affair, to Jacob's promises of marriage, but denied any knowledge of financial misconduct. She played the part of the innocent lover, insisting she merely fell in love with a man who claimed he was divorcing his wife. Patrick pressed, "Did Mr. Delgado ever mention, even indirectly, wanting to shift funds out of the country, presumably to protect them from the plaintiff?" Annalise hesitated, swallowing hard. "Not in so many words," she finally said. He mentioned wanting to make sure his money was secure." That small admission sent a ripple through the courtroom. Jacob's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. By the time Annalise stepped down, sweat dotted her brow. She cast a fleeting glance at Jacob, who looked away. After a tense lunch recess, the court reconvened. Garrett strode to the center, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Your Honor, we have newly obtained evidence regarding Miss Delgado's own financial history, specifically questionable transactions in her name that raise concerns about her credibility." A hush descended. Maria's heart skipped. She had no idea what they were referring to. She quickly glanced at Patrick, who looked equally puzzled. Jennifer furrowed her brow. Could Jacob's legal team have found something contrived to discredit Maria. Garrett projected documents onto a screen. They showed wire transfers from an account titled M. Delgado to a bank in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were substantial, several $1 million. Maria was dumbfounded. She had never seen those transactions. "This is absurd," Patrick hissed. "Miss Delgado has no knowledge of these accounts. They must be fabricated," but Garrett pressed on. "Nevertheless, these documents indicate that Miss Delgado might have known about offshore practices and even participated in them. We must question her integrity and motivations." Maria's stomach churned. She realized this was a smear tactic, orchestrated to paint her as complicit or hypocritical. But how had they manufactured these records? The judge frowned, calling for order. "Miss Delgado," she addressed Maria, "do you have any knowledge of these transactions?" Maria stood, voice trembling but resolute. "None whatsoever, Your Honor. This is the first I've seen of these so-called documents. I suspect they're part of a scheme by Mr. Delgado to undermine my case." Jacob's eyes flicked toward her. Was there a flicker of regret or just determination to win at any cost? The judge instructed further examination of the evidence, and recess was called for the day. The media outside went wild, speculating on whether Maria was truly innocent or had skeletons in her closet. That evening, as Maria regrouped with her team, she tried to steady her nerves. Jennifer cursed Jacob's low blow. Patrick immediately launched an investigation into the suspicious documents, suspecting they were forged or manipulated. Meanwhile, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Richard Pine. "Meet me at my office tomorrow at 7 a.m. I might have found something that can flip this around." Tension thrummed within her. She realized that she was dancing on the edge of a high-stakes game, one where illusions could be crafted and destroyed in an instant. She also sensed that if she didn't play her cards right, she could lose everything. The next morning, Maria arrived at Richard Pine's unremarkable office building in Chelsea. In a modest but tidy workspace, he greeted her with a firm handshake. On his desk, he had a laptop open to a complicated spreadsheet of IP addresses and account details. "I suspected those documents introduced in court were forged," he began without preamble. "So I did a deep dive into the digital metadata of the wire transfers. Every time a wire transfer is done, there's an electronic fingerprint. Long story short, the documents we saw in court have anomalies that suggest they were fabricated." Maria felt a surge of relief but also anger at Jacob's treachery. "So it's definitely fake," Richard nodded. "Yes, and I have proof. The IP addresses associated with these transactions trace back to a shell company that's linked to Delgado Holdings. The digital watermark indicates the documents were created using a specific software license registered to that same shell company. In simpler terms, it was an inside job." Maria exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. She wanted to hug Richard, but she settled for gripping his arm. "This is exactly what we need. With this, we can prove they tried to frame me." Richard offered a faint smile. "Be careful. Jacob's cornered, and cornered people can be unpredictable. But yes, this should be enough to dismantle their smear campaign." Armed with this new evidence, Maria returned to the courthouse. Patrick introduced Richard Pine's findings, systematically debunking the false documents. The judge was furious at the apparent attempt to mislead the court. Garrett stammered that they'd obtained the documents from an anonymous source and had no knowledge of the forgery. Jacob looked livid, glancing at Annalise, who stared at the floor. The judge sternly reminded all parties that perjury and tampering with evidence carried severe consequences. In a decisive moment, she ordered a full forensic audit of Delgado Holdings' accounts. That spelled disaster for Jacob, who had spent years carefully disguising questionable dealings. It was the final straw that cracked his empire's shell wide open. When the courtroom resumed, Maria's legal team presented ironclad evidence that the so-called Cayman Islands bank statements in her name were forged. Metadata traced them back to a shell company tied to Delgado Holdings, proving Jacob's team had fabricated documents to discredit her. Furious at the deception, the judge ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of all Delgado Holdings accounts. Within days, the company's stock nosedived as investors panicked and board members blamed Jacob for the ensuing scandal. Facing mounting pressure, they forced him to step down as CEO, leaving him humiliated and struggling to salvage his reputation. Simultaneously, Maria's divorce proceedings reached a turning point. Recognizing he was cornered by the damning audit and under threat of a potential criminal investigation, Jacob instructed his lawyer to extend a vastly improved settlement offer. Instead of the nominal amounts initially proposed, Maria now stood to receive $200 million, a portfolio of properties including the Manhattan penthouse, and an official acknowledgement of Jacob's wrongdoing. Crucially, the settlement would also include his public apology for using forged evidence against her. Desperate to minimize further legal liabilities and public shame, Jacob surrendered to every condition, though he seethed at the outcome. On the day the final documents were signed, Jacob approached Maria in the courthouse hallway, offering a halting apology that acknowledged his betrayal and, beneath that, his regret at how spectacularly he had destroyed their shared dreams. Maria accepted his words without malice, though the bond they'd once shared was irrevocably severed. Annalise Winslow did not appear. Rumors suggested she was already planning her exit, unwilling to remain at Jacob's side now that his empire was in shambles. With the divorce finalized, Maria stepped away from the chaos. Though she walked away with more money than she'd ever imagined, she remained grounded by the values her parents had instilled in her. Resolving to use her resources for good, she founded an organization to assist women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, separation, or financial struggles. Daniela, Jacob's sister, became a staunch supporter. Together, they furnished the charity's new office, forging a friendship born of mutual respect rather than shared loyalty to Jacob. Jacob's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale in Manhattan's elite circles, a parable of unchecked ambition leading to ruin. Free from his shadow, Maria embraced her next chapter on her own terms, moving into a modern penthouse across town, a space she chose herself. Not out of obligation, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Gazing at the skyline one late afternoon, she allowed the crisp air to fill her lungs, contemplating the journey that had challenged her faith in love and trust. Yet, in rising from the rubble, Maria discovered a powerful truth. Broken dreams could serve as the foundation for a more genuine, self-determined future. In the end, she transformed a devastating betrayal into an unbreakable will, resolved to live fully and authentically. Her story an enduring testament to resilience and renewal. And there you have it, the twists and turns of Maria Delgado's remarkable journey from unsuspecting wife to triumphant phoenix. She discovered the power of self-reinvention in the face of heartbreak and high-stakes drama, proving that even the deepest betrayals can ignite a fierce determination to rise. Jacob Delgado's downfall and Annalise Winslow's vanishing act became cautionary tales whispered throughout Manhattan's elite circles, while Maria's name was etched into the city's lore as a resilient survivor who refused to back down. She built a new life that honored her past but never allowed it to define her future. If you've been hooked by this tale of scandal, reinvention, and triumph, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Help us spread the inspiration and let others know that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to step into the light stronger than ever. Together, we can celebrate stories of courage, resilience, and personal victory.